Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a story today about what it takes to rebuild when everything seems lost. We're going to be looking at the Book of Nehemiah,
Hmm.
a story about leadership and faith and just sheer determination. So imagine, right, you're Nehemiah,
Okay.
you're a Jewish exile
Yeah.
living in Persia in the 5th century BC.
Mm-hmm.
Word reaches you that Jerusalem, the heart of your people's history,
Mm-hmm.
is in ruins.
Right.
Walls broken down, gates burned. I mean, it's just vulnerable to attack.
Yeah, it's a devastating image, and the text really captures how heavy this news is for Nehemiah. He weeps, he mourns, he fasts, and he prays.
Wow.
But here's what's interesting. His name, Nehemiah, actually means the Lord comforts. It's like
Oh.
foreshadowing almost of his role. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's like his name itself becomes part of the story, right? It's
Yeah.
not just some random detail.
Right.
So we see this deep grief, but then he shifts to action, right?
Yeah, he does. And the first thing he does is pray. But this isn't like some casual, hey, God, please fix this kind of prayer. Nehemiah really lays bare the sins that his people have committed, and he acknowledges the role that they played in what's happened. But he also reminds God about the promise to restore them
Right.
if they come back to him.
So there's that balance, you know?
Yeah.
Taking responsibility, but also clinging to hope.
Yeah.
I think what's so striking to me is that he doesn't just, pray for a miracle. He seems ready to actually be part of the solution.
Absolutely. And that's where his position becomes super important because, see, he's not just any random exile.
Right.
He's the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes.
Oh,
So this means he was constantly near the king. He would taste the king's wine to make sure it wasn't poisoned.
whoa.
I mean, talk about high stakes. So you can see it was a job that required a lot of trust.
Makes you think, right.
Mhm.
Did that constant awareness of danger maybe shape his approach to leadership? Like, did it make him more strategic, more calculated?
That is a great question. And you know what? It seems like it did. We can see it in how he approaches the king.
Okay.
He waits for the perfect moment.
Okay.
When the king notices his sadness and asks him about it.
Hmm.
Now, showing that kind of emotion in front of the king, huge risk.
Yeah.
Especially since the text even tells us that the king's consort, probably the queen, was right there with them,
Oh, wow.
adding this whole other layer of
Complication.
complication, yeah.
So he's walking on a tightrope here.
Well,
What happens when he finally tells the king what's bothering him?
so he tells the king all about what's going on in Jerusalem, about the graves of his ancestors being in ruins.
Hmm.
And then he asks the king if he can go back and rebuild.
He does.
Yeah.
Come on, that's a pretty crazy move, right? He's got a prestigious job. He's relatively safe. Why would he risk everything?
It shows you how deep his faith was and how strong his sense of purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just about rebuilding some city. It was about reclaiming his people's heritage, their connection to God.
Yeah.
And get this, the king says yes.
He does. Just like that.
Well, I'm sure there were some pretty tense moments in that conversation. But in the end, the king gave Nehemiah letters of safe passage so he could travel safely.
Wow.
And he also gave him resources to help with the rebuilding. Really shows the king trusted him.
Yeah.
And it shows how good Nehemiah was at persuading people.
So he starts off on this journey, carrying the hopes of all his people with him. What's waiting for him in Jerusalem? Does he, march in with a big parade and, try to rally the troops?
He's a lot more strategic than that.
Okay.
What he does is he actually does a secret inspection.
What?
Yeah, at night.
A secret nighttime inspection.
Of the ruined walls. The text actually emphasizes that he rode alone except for the animal he was riding, like a secret mission,
That's so interesting. Why all the secrecy?
He wanted to figure out the situation before he told anyone his plan. He needed to see how bad the damage was, get a feel for the city layout, and think about all the challenges.
Yeah.
The city gates would have been super important in his inspection too, each one with its own story
Right.
and its own meaning for Jerusalem's defense.
It's like he's like a general, checking out the battlefield before he launches a campaign.
Yeah.
So after this secret mission, what does he do? Does he have a town meeting or make some big announcement to get everybody excited to start rebuilding?
Well, he does rally the people.
Okay.
He reminds them about their history together, their covenant with God, how important this task is.
Right.
And you know what? They're totally on board.
Really?
Yeah, super enthusiastic, ready to take back their city.
But it can't be all smooth sailing from here, right?
Well, of course not. Anytime you try to do something big, there are always people who push back, people who feel threatened, by a strong, united Jerusalem.
Right.
And in our story, those guys are Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. Oh, yeah, these guys. So we've got Sanballat, he was like a regional governor.
Okay.
And then there's Tobiah, an Ammonite official, and Geshem, who is an Arab leader, and their opposition. Probably a whole mix of political and religious worries, you know?
Yeah, I could see that.
They saw a strong Jerusalem as like a threat, right? To their power and their influence.
Right, right. So they were just going to sit around and watch this happen. What did they do? How did they try to, like, mess things up?
It was pretty nasty. They mocked the workers, threatened them,
Oh, wow.
tried to, break their spirit, and they even started rumors.
Seriously?
Yeah, and tried to stir up trouble with the surrounding nations.
So they were trying to, like, make everyone scared and create chaos.
Exactly. So not just physical obstacles, but like psychological warfare too.
Wow. I mean, how did Nehemiah deal with all this pressure? Did he ever, like, have second thoughts?
He never wavered. He just kept his focus on the task at hand.
That's impressive.
But he also took those threats seriously. He really understood the power of, like, both prayer and action. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
He trusted in God, but he also did what he needed to do to protect the people.
Okay, so give me an example. What did this, like, blend of faith and strategy look like?
Well, he took all the workers and divided them into two groups. Okay.
One group kept building.
Yeah.
The other group stood guard, armed, and ready to defend against attack.
Whoa.
And the text even says, like, even the guys carrying materials, they had a weapon in one hand.
No way. So they're literally building with one hand and holding a sword in the other.
Pretty much. It really shows you how dedicated and courageous they were.
Yeah, wow. But so in the middle of all this external pressure, Nehemiah also finds some problems within the community too, right?
You got it. Nehemiah wasn't just focused on the physical building, you know.
Right.
He was also super concerned about the people, their well-being, their spirituality.
Yeah.
And what he discovers is the rich people are taking advantage of the poor,
Oh,
forcing them into debt,
that's terrible.
even slavery.
Really?
Yeah. It really bothered him, this injustice.
I mean, that seems like the opposite of everything he was trying to build.
Totally. And he was furious. He publicly called out the people who were doing this, reminded them about their covenant with God, a covenant that meant taking care of the vulnerable.
There's this really powerful image where he shakes out his garment.
What?
Yeah, like symbolically showing how God would shake out the people who weren't keeping their promises.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that leadership isn't just about achieving a goal, right?
Right.
It's about actually living out the values you say you believe in.
Exactly. And it totally connects to that idea of social justice that's all over the Hebrew Bible, wouldn't you say?
For sure. But did Nehemiah just talk the talk? Or did he walk the walk, too?
Yeah, he definitely walked the walk. He refused all those fancy perks that came with being governor.
Really?
And he even shared his own stuff with the people, showing them he was with them in their struggle.
So even with all these obstacles,
Yeah.
inside and outside, did they finish the wall? Did they have a moment of, like, victory?
They did. It's amazing, actually. They finished the wall in 52 days.
52 days. That's crazy fast, especially back then. What did their enemies think?
They were crushed, you
Yeah.
know? They realized that God was with Nehemiah and the builders. But the story doesn't end there. I mean, building a physical wall doesn't automatically mean you have a united, strong community, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. What happened next? Did everybody just relax and go back to life as usual?
Not exactly. See, the wall was finished, but the real work was just beginning.
What do you mean?
Rebuilding the community, their spiritual core, that was the next challenge. And this part of Nehemiah's leadership, maybe even harder than the first part.
Okay, so last time we were talking about, the wall is rebuilt, Jerusalem is rededicated.
Right.
But you said the journey wasn't over. What happens next? After all the celebrating dies down and, like, everyday life starts again.
Well, this is where things get really interesting because the book, it doesn't try to hide the fact that it's hard to keep up that initial energy, you know?
Yeah, I can imagine.
Nehemiah has to deal with people becoming complacent or losing interest,
Right.
even going back to their old ways.
Like those New Year's resolutions, right?
Exactly. Start strong, then by February, poof.
Gone. So how does Nehemiah, like, handle this spiritual drift?
He becomes like this guardian of the covenant, you know?
Okay.
He tackles the things that threaten their commitment to God and to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things he sees is that the Levites, the ones responsible for the temple services,
Yeah.
they're not getting the support they need.
You mean the people are neglecting the temple, like
Well-
the very heart of their spiritual life?
Exactly. People had gotten lazy about their tithes and offerings.
Ah, so the Levites had to go back to working their fields just to survive.
Yeah, and Nehemiah. He's not happy about it. He reminds everyone, hey, the Levites, they play a huge role in keeping us connected to God.
Right. Like out of sight, out of mind kind of thing.
That's it. So what does Nehemiah do? He gets things organized again,
Yep.
makes sure the tithes and offerings are collected properly.
So the Levites can focus on their spiritual duties.
Right. He gets it. A strong spiritual life needs practical support, too.
He's not just a spiritual leader, he's a problem solver.
That's Nehemiah. But then another problem pops up.
Oh, no, what now?
It's about the people who married folks from the surrounding nations.
Oh,
I mean, that went directly against the covenant.
Yeah.
Even some of the priests were doing it.
wow. I can see how that would be a problem. It's not about being exclusive, right?
Oh,
It's
right.
about like protecting their identity, their faith after they've come back from exile.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
for Nehemiah, intermarriage, it wasn't just a personal thing. It
Right.
was a threat to their whole community and their faith.
Yeah.
So he calls them out, reminds them of their promises, the dangers of blending in with everyone else.
Mhm.
And you know what he does? He shakes out his garment again.
No way.
Yeah. Like rejecting those who weren't going to honor the covenant.
He's serious about this.
Yeah.
It's like rebuilding Jerusalem wasn't just about the buildings.
Yeah.
It was about a way of life.
Exactly. Their commitment to what they believed.
But even with like his strong leadership,
Mm-hmm.
there are still problems.
Right. Unfortunately, yeah. Nehemiah, he has to go back to Persia for a while. When he gets back to Jerusalem, guess what?
More chaos.
You got it. This time, it's about Tobiah,
Oh, no, not that guy again.
the one and only. And get this, he's been given a room in the temple complex.
What? Seriously? The guy who tried to sabotage the whole thing is now living in the temple.
Yep. It seems Eliashib, the high priest, well, he was related to Tobiah through marriage,
Ah, okay.
and he let it happen. Totally disrespectful to the temple, a huge slap in the face to Nehemiah.
So what did Nehemiah do? I bet he wasn't too happy about it.
He was furious. He didn't waste any time, threw out all of Tobiah's stuff,
Yeah,
and purified the space.
like took it back.
Yeah. He knew rebuilding also meant protecting what they'd built.
He's a man of action, that's for sure. So as we get to the end of Nehemiah's story, what's the vibe? Is there like a sense of peace, like everything's finally restored?
Well, the ending is kind of interesting. There's definitely a sense of accomplishment, but there's also this acknowledgement that the work's never really over, you know?
Oh, I see.
The book ends with Nehemiah praying for God's continued blessing on Jerusalem, recognizing that they'll always need his guidance.
It's a realistic ending.
Yeah. Rebuilding isn't about reaching some perfect finish line.
Right.
It's about constantly striving to live up to your ideals.
So thousands of years later, what can we learn from Nehemiah's story?
I think Nehemiah shows us that rebuilding anything, a city, a community, or even just our own lives,
Yeah.
it's complicated. It takes vision, commitment,
Right.
the courage to face challenges inside and out.
And it's not just about doing stuff. It's also about thinking, reflecting,
Totally. Celebrating the wins, learning from the mistakes.
and knowing that the work never really ends.
Exactly. But maybe most importantly, it takes a deep faith,
Yeah.
a belief that there's something bigger than ourselves that we're a part of.
Nehemiah's journey, it shows us that even when all hope seems lost,
Yeah.
rebuilding is always possible.
It's powerful, a testament to what faith and perseverance can achieve.
Absolutely. Well said. And on that note, we're wrapping up our deep dive into the book of Nehemiah. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah,